For episode 3, part 3 picks up where part 2 leaves off. When we last left Lionel, he's face to face with a fist pounder that was driven by Monkey and other mutants. Also, as we learned back in part 2, Panthro, Chitara, and Tigra are on their way to Hook Mountain. Also, back in part 2, Snarf, who has been captured earlier, he's now still being held hostage because of Rataro and Vultureman are in the Rat Star. And now, thanks to Captain Shiner, also back in part 2, had just transported the Thundarians to Fire Rock Mountain. So that's where part 3 begins. So anyway, back with Lino, he's face to face with a fist pounder since back in part 2. Well, you remember Snowman and his sidekick, Snowmeow. Well, Snowman tries to warn Monkey in on his fist pounder. He says, "Wait! Stop!" And then before you know it, the Snowman just tries to warn Monkey and other mutants to say, "You'll cause an avalanche." So finally the fist pounder stopped. And then Monkey looked around, and then he suspected that what the Snowman said was true. And then the avalanche starts to happen. Well, back with the fist pounder, long story short, well, it manages to evacuate. And of course, back with Lino, he tries to evacuate the best way he knew how to avoid the avalanche. So, long story short, now that the avalanche has subsided, a bunch of snow had just buried Lino and his sword. Well, good news for Snowman and his sidekick, Snowmeow, they managed to make it out all right. But now they're going to be looking for Lino and the Sword of Omen somewhere. At first, Snowman thought that Lino had disappeared, and that's when Snowmeow, who's Snowman's sidekick, he knows what to do. So what Snowmeow did was that he was digging through the snow, and so was his sidekick, Snowman. And so both of them started digging together until finally, at last, they found Lino encased in ice, no doubt. Well, now that they found him, now it's up to the snowman to do the rest by using the handle of his snow lance to break through the ice. Well, now that he did that, that's when Lionel woke up and looked at Snowman and his sidekick. Well, Lionel wanted to know from Snowman where did his sword go. Well, it disappeared somewhere, Snowman said. Well, Lionel thought that all hope was lost, and that's when Snowman says, "Not quite. We're going to have a plan to get you out of here." But Lionel dismissed the Snowman's idea and said that there was no way he could get him out of there. He's encased in ice. Unless, of course, aha, Lionel has a plan. He has another way to get himself out of there. So you're probably wondering, what was Lionel's plan? He does what he normally does, calls for his sword to come to his hand immediately. And of course, that's what he did. So Lionel uses every strength he got to break his arm out of the ice. So speaking of which, back with the Sword of Omens, it cracked itself out of the ice as well. And what it did next was unbelievable. And right in front of Snowman and his sidekick, it went straight up first, and then after that, it went straight to Lino and right into his hand. So finally, good news for Lino, and with the use of his sword, he broke himself out of the ice. Well, now that Lino's out of the ice, the next thing he did was he did what any good guy would do, call his friends from his sword, of course, by projecting the Thundercats signal. So that's what he did. So meanwhile, back with Chitara, who's in the Thunderclaw, she just lets Tigra and a Hovercat know that there's a signal up ahead. And of course, he hears her pretty clear, Tigra that is, and so both of the vehicles are on their way. So back with Lionel and along with Snowman and his sidekick. So what Snowman wants to know what he's summoning his friends for and that the mutants got away. Well, that's true, Lionel says, but only for a while anyway. So after Lionel had pleaded his case with Snowman that they will come back to attack, and wouldn't you know it, he was soon proven right, and they are being attacked. The first thing Lionel did was to look up in the sky, and there's a sky cutter with Scythe, the leader of the mutants. Then he looked over his shoulder to see Jackalman, and he's in the nosediver. So, when the snowman had found out about it, he went on psychic, snow meow. And wouldn't you know it, they went on to attack Jackalman, who's in the nosediver, so that's what they did. In the meantime, Lino goes one on one with Sly, the leader of the mutants, and the Sky Cutter. So anyway, after Lino runs off, that's when Sly and the Sky Cutter started chasing him. And he just laughed at him and says, "That's right, Lino, run!" So long story short, after that short-lived attack, that's when, aha, Lino has a plan. He needed a vehicle and he needs one quick. So what does he do? He decided to wait for the Sky Cutter to come around again, and so that's what he did. So back with Sly, the leader of the mutants, he had no idea what Lionel was planning. So he decided to chase him for a while. Next thing you know, he started attacking Lionel. So anyway, Lionel was stunned for a while, but what Sly doesn't know is that Lionel was planning to trick him. And so that's what he did. So back with Sly, the leader of the mutants on the Skycutter, by the time he comes back, he wanted to make sure that Lionel's done for, or so he thought. And that's when, surprise, what happened was a trick. And so what Lionel did is that he climbs onto the Skycutter. So once Sly knew it was all a trick, so what he did next was unbelievable. He tries to get Lionel off the Skycutter the best way he knew how. But by surprise, Lionel just hangs on to it. And so by the time that Lionel grabs onto the back of the Skycutter, that's when Sly says, "That's a good idea. Hang on tight." And so off they went. So back with Lionel still underneath the Skycutter, what he did is that he did a backflip to throw Sly off the Skycutter. So he did. And so Lionel's now on the Skycutter, and off he went. So back with the Thunderclaw and Hovercat that were driven by Chitara and Tigra, they just saw the nosediver that's down below, and of course Snowman and Psychic were chasing him. So back with Tigra and the Hovercat, he was told by Chitara that there's a sky cutter behind him. But neither he or Chitara knew that it was Lino and not exactly Sly, the leader of the mutants, that was on the sky cutter just moments ago. So back with Lino in the sky cutter, he had no idea that behind him was Tiger and the Hovercat, and he's attacking him without even knowing it. So back with Tigra on the Hovercat, he's really confused. And he's wondering why Sly, the leader of the mutants, isn't attacking back. But he still is unaware that Lionel's on the Skycutter and not Sly's. And that's when Lionel says, "I'm going to be in trouble if I don't do anything about it." And that's when, surprise, he has an idea. He decides to get his Sword of Omens to convince Tigra otherwise. So good news, now that Lionel got his sword, but he had no idea that Tiger and the Hovercat are still pursuing him. Long story short, back with the Hovercat that was about to attack the Sky Cutter, Lionel does what he knows best, project the Thundercat signal from his sword. Back with Tigra on the Thundercat, he now realized, wait a minute, a Thundercat signal? He now knows that it was Lionel that's on the Sky Cutter and not Sly, the leader of the mutants. Tiger just couldn't believe what he was doing. He couldn't believe it. So back with Tiger on the Hovercat, once he looked over his shoulder and he knew that it was Lionel on the Sky Cutter, he lets Chitara on the Thunderclaw know that he had found him. And so both of them are on their way, the Thundercats that is. So once the vehicles had landed, both the Hovercat and the Skycutter, that's when Tiger says, "Gee, that was too close of a call." And so he apologized to Lionel for accidentally shooting at him. The reason? Because he thought it was Sly, the leader of the mutants, but now he realized he made a mistake. Then moments later, Chitara shows up with the Thunderclaw, and she was glad to see Lionel too. So Chitara wanted to know from Lino, where did Slides go? Well, Lino says in his case, the last time he saw him, he tries to climb out of the ravine where he left them at. So then it's Tiger's turn to ask a question. So what's the plan? Well, Lionel says, the next thing we can do is just rescue our Thundarian friends, he said. And of course, as any leader would do, Lionel has a hunch. He said that Mumra must have known where they were. So what was Lionel's idea? To go to the Black Pyramid, of course. Well, long story short, now that Chitara knew what Lionel was planning to do, but then she kind of dismissed the idea and then said that that's impossible. So Lionel, although supportive, said to Chitara, I found Mumra's pyramid before, the secret way in, no doubt. If I found that before, I'll find it again. Don't worry about it, he said. So after Lionel gets on the sky cutter, he then heads off. So after Lionel heads off, she then looks at Tigra. Then there's no time to lose. So they decided to get into their vehicles, the Hovercat and the Thunderclaw, and they too head off. Back with Snowman and his sidekick, they're still pursuing the nosediver with Jackalman in it. Anyway, Snowman just pleaded his case with Jackalman that you're wise to run away from me. Interestingly, though, Jackalman pleaded his case with the Snowman. He says, you're wiser to chase me. So back with Jackalman in the nosediver, he meets up with Monkey and in the fist pounder, the one that had evacuated earlier because of the avalanche. And that's when Jackalman said to Monkey, and get ready, he's coming. So after the nosediver heads off, and that's when the snowman saw what was going on, he was being pursued by the fist pounder. And so both the snowman and his sidekick decides to back up. So Monkey asked a question. You weren't expecting the fist pounder, are you? And he gets closer and closer to Snowman and his sidekick. Monkey, that is. Well, back with the snowman and his sidekick, they were about to engage in attack. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, remember Panthro in his thunder tank? He shows up moments later. So, Panthro, however, had a hunch. It might be an earthquake. So, with no time to waste, he knew that the snowman needed some assistance. So, Panthro and his thunder tank were on their way. So speaking of the snowman, back with him and his sidekick, they're still engaging in an attack. That was until when Snowman decides to take matters in his own hands, he goes one on one with Monkey and other mutants. That was until back with Panthro and his thunder tank. Well, because he used a cannon, the fighting between the snowman and Monkey stopped. I guess Panther wasn't kidding when he said the snowman really did needed help. So back with the fist pounder, after the snowman ran off, it goes one on one with the thunder tank. And of course, Monkey wasn't kidding when he said that he waited a long time for that moment. So back with the thunder tank as it gets closer and closer to the fist pounder, and Panthro knows that this could mean a serious problem. So back with the thunder tank and the fist pounder as they get closer and closer to each other, but then at the last minute, the thunder tank just turns around in the other direction, and the fist pounder started pursuing it. So meanwhile, inside the Rat Star's control room, you remember Snarf from Part 2 who was captured earlier? What Vultureman did is that he puts his front paws in chains and taped them up. Oh, by the way, the rat star's in Hook Mountain too. So, when Rataro told Vultureman that there's something going on there, and there's a battle going on between the Fist Pounder and the Thunder Tank. Watching it happen on screen with Snarf, and he just can't do a thing about it. Then back with Vultureman, he just pleaded his case with Rataro. He said that there is no way that the Thunder Tank could stand a chance against the Fist Pounder. Well, back with Snarf, he was dreading with fear as he watches it on screen. And of course, Rataro wasn't kidding when he told Vultureman this case. It looks like a standoff to me. So back with the Thunder Tank, it goes one on one with a fist pounder shooting at it. So while that's going on, back in the Restor's control room, Vultureman panicked and then told Ratoro this case that the Thunder Tank's going to flip the fist pounder on its side by broadsiding it. Back with the Rastar is about to prepare a cannon, and what was it doing? It was about to attack the Thunder Tank to prevent it from flipping over the fist pounder. But by surprise, the shot missed, and when Panthro looked behind him, he saw that there's a Rastar and it's attacking him. So back with Vultureman and Rataro in the Rastar's control room, they saw that the Thunder Tank is getting away. So Vultureman says, "Hurry! It's running away!" But Rataro says, "No, it's not. What he is doing is that he needed a better position for a counterattack," Rataro said. So back with the Rastar after Ratoro had pleaded his case to say it's not going to do the Thunder Tank any good, it decided to attack it, and attack it did. So back in the Rastar's control room, now that that's finished, Ratoro thought that he had finished off the Thunder Tank, and of course he laughed with delight. And of course Vultureman agrees with Ratoro, or so he thought. So back with Snarf, who's still on the floor all chained up and gagged, he just couldn't believe what he saw and what he witnessed. He thought that Panthro was finished off for good, or so he thought. So meanwhile, back on Hook Mountain with Jacko-Man of the Mutants, who saw Slides of the Mutants climbing up, he says, "Hurry up! Captain Shiner's expecting us." Besides, Jacko-Man said, he's getting impatient. Well, Sly, the leader of the mutants, has only one problem: how he's going to get there on Fire Rock Mountain, since now his sky cutter's missing thanks to Lino. Well, you'll have to make do with me. Hop aboard a nosediver, Jackalman suggested. So now with both of the mutants are on the nosediver, they're now on their way to Fire Rock Mountain to meet up with Captain Shiner. So meanwhile, on Fire Rock Mountain, so there's Captain Shiner, who saw the nosediver with the two mutants who had finally arrived. And so he says, "Well, it's about time you two showed up." And then Captain Shiner looked at his men and says, "They do make quite a pair, don't they?" Well, Sly, the leader of the mutants, was not amused with Captain Shiner's insult and started to attack him. So anyway, Captain Shiner dodges his attack. But then Captain Shiner had to convince Sly, the leader of the mutants, to say, "Hold on, we are working together after all," and he's not kidding. But first of all, he told Sly, the leader of the mutants, to put the Thundarians in their cells first, and that's the first order of business. Then Captain Shiner just made his case quite clear that since the Thundarians are weak anyway, thanks to the Thundaranium, then Slythe, according to what Captain Shiner says in his case, should be able to handle the job. So after that, Captain Shiner and his crew head back to the ship. So anyway, long story short, Slythe, the leader of the mutants, told the Thundarians, "Okay, let's go, move it." And so they head inside Fire Rock Mountain. So as the five of them walked further and further and further into the mountain, that's when Bengali had this funny feeling. And so he told Palmyra and Linkso that he doesn't feel weak anymore. Now Palmyra, who agrees with Bengali, she felt that way too, and so did Linkso. The further away from Thundranium they got their strength back. That was until Linkso tripped over a rock. So Sly, the leader of the mutants who saw what had happened, he tries to force Linkso to stand. But Palmyra wouldn't allow it, and she says, "Will you cut it out? Don't you see that Linkso is blind?" she said. "Well, that's true," Sly said, "but it's easier for me to handle, right?" "Well," Palmyra says, "why don't you handle this for a change?" So what Palmyra did was unbelievable. She makes a jump drop kick on Sly, the leader of the mutants, which knocks out both him and Jackal-Man all at once. Now Bengali seems very impressed with that. So Bengali says, "Let's get out of here." So while both he and Palmyra ran one way, and Linksa went to the other direction. So by the time that the mutants got up, Sly, the leader of the mutants, told Jackalman to go after the two of them while Sly can handle Linkso. And so both of the mutants agreed to split up. So back with Jackalman, he wasn't even sure which corridor to take. And then he pleaded his case to say that Palmyra and Bengali would have taken any one of those. So back with Linkso, he went inside of what looks like a way out, but instead he found a dead end. He says, "Oh dear, I must have chosen the wrong route." And if things couldn't get any worse, that's when Linkso didn't notice that Sly, the leader of the mutants, was right behind him, and it says, "Call your friends, the fun's over." And that's when he goes on to attack with his axe. So after the head of the axe came off, and in long story short, after Linkso tries to attack Sly the best way he knew how, but unfortunately he failed, and that's what caused Sly to slam the door behind Linkso. So back with Palmyra and Bengali, who just found out that Linkso's in the cell, that's when Bengali says, "Don't worry, we'll get you out of here." But they weren't aware that Sly, the leader of the mutants, has a surprise just for them, just as he did with Linkso. So guess what Sly did? He decided to trick Palmyra and Bengali too by closing the door, locking them in the exact same room as Linkso is. So when Jackalman came back, he was amused to see that they've got the Thundarians just where they wanted them, and Sly, the leader of the mutants, agrees with him. So now that the Thundarians are inside the cell, Bengali was about to give up all hope, and he says, "It looks like we're done for." And Palmyra happens to agree with him and says, "It seems that way." So Linksoul told Palmyra and Bengali, and of course there's a saying, if there's a will, there's a way. So Bengali wants to know from Linksoul, "You have a plan?" "As a matter of fact, I do," Linksoul said, "but we need to be patient. So if the time comes and when that time comes, that's when we make our move." So what was the plan? I can't say for sure. So later at the Black Pyramid, Lionel, who had just moments ago had left Hook Mountain, and thanks to him borrowing the Sky Cutter from Sly, the leader of the mutants, he made it there to find the secret way in, just like he did once before. But what Lionel doesn't realize is that watching him in the cauldron in the tomb chamber is Mum-Ra and his canine companion. He says, "That's right, Lionel. Come on. I'm waiting for you." So Mumra, being the bad guy that he is, he told his canine sidekick that he has a favor for him. So he says, "Pay attention. I have a favor for you." So even though the favor was never explained, so what did Mumra do? He sent his canine companion on his way. So back with Lino, he has now entered the next room there are three gaps in every direction up ahead. So now all he has to do is jump across. Sounds simple, right? So that's exactly what Lionel did, and he did it without a problem. But now he's face to face with Marmot, who's Mumra's sidekick. So now that Lionel's face to face with Marmot for the first time, he says, "Move out of the way. I don't want to hurt you. Go on now." But when Marmot refused to move, guess what Lionel did? He decided to take matters in his own hands. He grabs Marmot, just like any hero will do, and then throws it over. So after Lionel did that, he finds it really, really weird. And that he said that there was no way he could have thrown it that far, but then he sees a fireball that's coming up behind him. But luckily for Lionel, he started to run. Well, good news for Lionel, he manages to jump down to avoid the fireball, and little didn't he know he's in the next room from down below. So Lionel spotted some hieroglyphics on the wall. He says, I don't know who that creature is, but he has done me a favor. But then Lionel soon realizes that he wasn't alone, because out of nowhere is Marmot. So, long story short, after Marmot's brief attack, what Lionel did is he put him in a sarcophagus to be detained for a while. So anyway, now that that's finished, Lionel now walks to the next room where there's a line of mummies in bandages, no doubt. Now, Lionel, up until this minute, has never seen a room quite like it before, and he couldn't help but think to himself, are these things Mumra's ancestors? Well, back with Mumra in the tomb chamber, he says, well, far from it. They're my prisoners for all eternity. So, long story short, after Mumra had pleaded his case back with Lionel, he didn't realize that the bandages had somehow, for unknown reason, just came to life. So anyway, back with Lionel, who saw a bandage that grabbed his leg. Luckily, he broke it off. Then another bandage just grabbed his arm. He broke that off too. But wait, it's not just many bandages, but there are still many more. So Lionel does what any good guy would do, try to fend off the bandages with his sword the best way he knew how. So, long story short, after fending off the bandages for a while, that's when Lionel began running off. But wait! As soon as Lionel runs off, a bunch of bandages that came to life started pursuing him. Then, long story short, after Lionel ran off, thought he had lost a bunch of bandages that came to life, but that's when he realizes that there are more bandages right in front of him. So what Lionel did is that he ran through the bandages while swiping his sword at the exact same time. But as he was still running, he says to himself that there's no way he can fight them off, not for very long. Well, good news, Lionel has found a doorway out. He tried to lift it, but no such luck. Then Lionel had this thought when he realized that there were buttons for the door. He said, if I am not mistaken, then one of these buttons may open the door. But he knows he had to do it quick because he hears the sound of bandages that are coming his way. But then, long story short, just when Lionel was about to push the button for the door, the bandage just grabbed his arm for the third time. And finally, with every strength he got, he broke off the bandage that grabbed him and punched the button. And so, good news, the door was open, and so Lionel ran out. But before that could happen, guess what? The bandages wouldn't allow him to escape. Then, long story short, when the door closed, his hair was caught. Things are looking bad for Lionel. And then, next thing you know, a bunch of bandages come through the door and covered all of Lionel's legs, his arms, and then just when things are looking bad. And now here comes the big question. Will Lionel be, to coin a phrase, be mummified? Or will there still be hope for him to escape? So that ends part 3 in episode 3.